This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my only friend. The end of all elaborate plans. The end of everything that stands. The end, no safety or surprise. The end, I'll never look into your eyes again. I should have practiced. Anyway, there have been a lot of videos over the years, blog articles and whatnot, and various podcasts babbling on about the end of Codeigniter, the death of Codeigniter and all of that stuff. And all through the years I was usually one of the first to come up and defend Codeigniter. Now, I hope you'll forgive me if this is a long video, but I have used Codeigniter since about 2011. And I've spent most of my waking hours working, coding in fact, which means that I've spent the best part of the last 10 years working on Codeigniter. And I'm not saying that this presentation is going to be any more graceful than any of the others or anything like that. But what I think I can say with a straight face is that I have almost certainly written more lines of code with Codeigniter than anyone on earth. I have apps out there today, many of which have several 100,000 lines of code written with Codeigniter. There are companies listed on the Dow Jones who are using Codeigniter. I know because I'm the guy who wrote the stuff. And not only that, but here on YouTube, until fairly recently, I had about 300 web development tutorials, and most of them were about Codeigniter. Now, I don't want this video to have too much of a negative vibrational energy, because Codeigniter owes me nothing. Codeigniter owes you nothing. Codeigniter is something that appeared from nowhere, free of charge, and it allowed us to build some pretty good web applications. We never even had to pay a penny, never even had to say thanks, and that's kind of good. So, you know, I suppose maybe a good thing to do is to divide this video up into two parts. And the first part, you know, I don't want to just be like, you know, demonizing some framework, but I'd like to have at least one section where I give you the reasons why I chose to use Codeigniter for all these years. And I tried all of the frameworks. I tried tons of different languages as well. Well, not tons, but let me get this right. Maybe about 4 different languages. And lots of different frameworks, and I stuck with Codeigniter. So I'd like to, if I may, tell you why that's the case and why I was so into Codeigniter, you know. So Codeigniter has a few things going for it, and here's what they are. First of all, I mean, you know all of this stuff, presumably, if you've looked into this. But Codeigniter has really good benchmarks. The page load speeds are fantastic. The page load speeds are incredibly fast. The syntax is really nice as well. Most people can pick it up quite quickly. It's really easy, nice syntax. One of the things that I liked about Codeigniter, which made me kind of unique, is I liked the stability. I liked the fact that it was not being rewritten every 6 months. And I can certainly tell you that my clients liked that as well. And strangely enough, not too many developers seem to agree, but there you go. The documentation was fantastic, and I think it's reasonable to say that there are some good people in the Codeigniter community. The dude Insight Effects from the forums, a really nice guy, you know. I've spoken to him over Skype, and there's some really cool people doing some cool stuff with that framework. And it has been good. Now, one of the reasons why I stuck with Codeigniter all through the years is because Codeigniter, well, it's not so long ago since it seems every framework in the universe was using MVC. But MVC was pretty much a flawed thing. And I know that people are clicking the dislike, but let me explain. Suppose you build a website with a discussion forum, an online shop, an invoicing system, an email marketing system, and a chat room. Now, if you split that up between 3 folders with models, views, and controllers, and then you have another site and you need to reuse that stuff, well, you are going to have a copy and paste nightmare dealing with all of that. And Codeigniter, as some of you folks know, had a thing that somebody from the community had came up with, and you could tweak the framework, and suddenly, instead of it being MVC, it would be HMVC. And didn't that H make us all feel smug? Stands for hierarchical. I wonder if that's the last time I'll say that. And the idea is that instead of just having 3 folders, we would have these clusters, these folders actually, and within each folder, which was called a module, we'd have a controllers folder, a models folder, and a views folder. This was fantastic. And at the time when I started using this, it was the only PHP framework that did anything like that. And I have friends who have used other frameworks. I have one friend who's been very heavily involved with the Zen framework. And all through the years, we used to kind of debate ferociously. And I would say to him, look, you may have the fancy bells and whistles, but Codeigniter is modular. And he had no comeback. I mean, he would just be like, fair enough. Now, the awesomeness of a modular structure cannot be understated. If you've never used it before, I wouldn't blame you for not being that impressed. Maybe you're happy with MVC. Good luck, that's fine. But you know who else agrees, by the way? Google apparently agree, because strangely enough, when Angular 2 came out, which was quite a controversial release, I remember looking at Angular 2, obviously a very modern framework made by Google and all of that. I remember looking at it, and when I looked at the structure, they had a different word. They never called it modules. They called them components. And when I looked at it, I was like, this is Codeigniter. This is the same type of structure. And as the years went by, of course, the various major frameworks all had shots of trying this modular thing. And sometimes they had different words like bundles and so on. But none of them quite pulled it off the way Codeigniter did. And I think that whenever any framework community attempted to do this vibe of the, kind of like the Lego type websites where you can snap parts on and whatnot, they never really did that good a job as far as I can tell. And certainly when you looked up what's the word I'm looking for? There was one for Ruby, I think, called Gems, and it was this website where you could download these ones that had been made by other people, and they were all garbage. And in fact, I think they still are to a large extent. It's one of the reasons why I'm personally not too into things like Composer, Same with NPM. How many times have we downloaded something from some great universal user library only to be disappointed, It's just the way it goes. Anyway, Codeigniter was pretty awesome, and it allowed you this separation so you could do that. Now, it was not perfect modularization, it was not truly modular, because if you had something like a chat room or any feature that required JavaScript, CSS, images, and whatnot, then it's all very well dragging the modules across with the PHP and the HTML stuff and maybe have your model file. But that's not much use if your thing uses tons of JavaScript and pictures and whatnot. So Codeigniter was never truly modular. And this is a really, really key point. But it was the closest thing that I could find. And over the years, Codeigniter, for better or for worse, seemed to resist the movement towards frequent rewrites, PSR, and just all of that poison that took over PHP. Anyway, Codeigniter kind of just seemed to be like, man, we're just going to do our thing. And I like that as well, actually. And over the years, I defended Codeigniter ferociously in various conversations, whether it be on Twitter or privately and sometimes in person, you know. And I have, like I say, I've posted over 300 Codeigniter videos, most of them now deleted. One of the video series that I posted was Build an Online Shop, and I keep my sounding like a broken record if you've been to this channel before, but that had about 135 videos. Some of those videos were over 40 minutes long. I believe it was the biggest web development tutorial series on YouTube. And so when I speak about Codeigniter, I want you to know that these words are coming from a place of experience. I would probably bet my house that I've used Codeigniter more than anyone, including the people who made it. Funnily enough, that doesn't mean that I'm an expert and that I understand every line of code. I actually took a look at the Codeigniter code, and to be honest, I can't understand most of it. If you show me a random section of Codeigniter code and say, what does that do? I'll probably be able to have a wild guess. I'll know roughly what it does. But as far as I can tell, it's a bit of a rat's maze, you know? Maybe that makes me an idiot. I don't know. But in any event, Codeigniter has been good. And I suppose it's important to have some recognition for that stuff. And it's certainly been very reliable, that's for sure. I've never had any problems with Codeigniter being hacked or anything like that, you know. Anyway, that's that. Shall we move on to the miserable part B, the second part where I focus on some of the not so positive things? Well, let's do that. But first, a quick commercial break. I think one of the key moments where I had a sense that things were not going according to plan was on the day when Ellis Lab, who made Codeigniter, announced that they were going to get rid of the framework, or they were going to pass it on or whatever. And they were taking, you know, suggestions or bids or whatever. Now, I got in touch with them, and a few people had said maybe you could make a bid for the framework or something, and things along that line, you know. I had a discussion forum of my own at the time, which was made up of mostly Codeigniter developers. There was about 4,000 people, and between us we felt like maybe we could do something with this. And so I remember I emailed Ellis Lab, and they seemed reasonably pleasant, but to be honest, the conversation never got very far. It was just like, you know, I just thought, I've got no chance, and I never took it much further than hello, you know, would you be interested type thing. And so I decided, you know, I'm just going to leave it. I've got too much on my plate. And then, and by the way, in hindsight, I think that might have been a mistake, because I think that having now looked at what happened, I think that, quite frankly, anybody could have done a better job, you know, because I remember when it got taken over by the new guardians, who shall not be named. And one of the very first things that they did, I think it was literally the first thing in fact, is they took the Codeigniter homepage, and the Codeigniter logo was a kind of yellow or an orangey flame. And what they did is they replaced that with a black flame, and they changed the homepage, I think, to say Codeigniter Rocks, and it's stayed that way ever since. Now, I've been a web developer for 23 years, and a lot of that has involved web design, and I have various books and whatnot on how to design sites that convert. And one of the first rules of web design, in fact, I learned this back in 1996 with my very first website, is you never mess with the logo. I mean, it may sound silly, but this is a golden rule. And if Steve Jobs were in here, he would be agreeing. And when I noticed that their first gesture was we're going to effectively mess up the logo and stuff, you may think that this sounds trivial. To the untrained eye, it probably is. But to the trained eye, I knew that this was a bad sign. I knew that this was an indication that the framework had been taken over by people who did not understand the basics of the marketplace, who did not understand how to promote a framework, how to do anything to get any kind of buzz around the framework, and who really didn't have much of a clue, at least in terms of promoting the thing goes. And I could tell that straight away just from the changes that they'd made to the site. But nevertheless, it was nothing to do with me, and I was happy to continue using the thing. And one of the things, I kept an eye on the Codeigniter forum when the new owners took over. And one of the things that they did, and I cannot remember how they reached this decision, but they had some kind of crossroads. It may have been a vote, it may have been a debate, I cannot remember. But I remember on the forum there was some kind of conversation about should we make Codeigniter modular, by default, because you had to go through this big 20-minute miserable setup in order for that HMVC stuff to work. So I remember that they had this conversation going on quite early on, and I thought, well, that's good. And to me it was kind of a no-brainer. I thought, well, maybe at the very least they're going to have like one version that's MVC and one that's HMVC. But for whatever reason, they decided no. They decided we're not going to do that, and we're going to just stick with MVC, which was a terrible decision. I don't care how they made that decision. I don't care if it was a democratic thing. It was stupid, because the modular thing, for those of us who were doing this for a living, that was the key selling point of the framework. So they made a really, really awful decision with that. And then, fairly shortly afterwards, they came out with Codeigniter 3, as far as I'm aware. I hope I've got my timeline right here. And Codeigniter 3 turned out to be just the same as Codeigniter 2, but with a few extra bugs if you didn't do things right, We had to change our file names so that they had an uppercase first letter, and there were a few other things. They did improve some of the things on Codeigniter, and for example, I think they got the cookie thing working, but some of the stuff that they did was just awful. I mean, it was laughably bad. For example, the form validation that they had an is unique validator. Is this record unique? And it was unusable. And when you look at Codeigniter 3, it's basically just Codeigniter 2 with a couple of things on top. Some of them kind of nice, some of them kind of stupid, but none of it really remarkable. And I remember at the time, I said in the Insider Club discussion forum, and this is going to sound negative, but I said it all those years ago. I said, Codeigniter 4 is never going to be released. And that seemed an outrageous thing. Now, just to be clear, Codeigniter 3 had either gone quite far down the road and then they took over and just finished it, or it had been bungled together and put out there. I'm not sure. But Codeigniter 3 was nothing really dramatic. And the new guardians of Codeigniter had wasted no time in saying we are now moving on to version 4. So like I said, I knew, I could see what way the wind was blowing. Version 4 is not going to happen. And again, this may sound smug, it may sound arrogant or something, but I know that academic institutions don't have a good track record when it comes to producing software for the marketplace. It's just a fact, If you look at all of the software out there that's done really well, even in the frameworks universe, none of it is coming from an academic institution. So this was just an observation and blah, 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 blah. Also, when I was looking on the forum, when I glanced on, and I never really participated in any conversations, but I was interested in seeing, what they're discussing, and I wonder what direction they're going to go in. And all I could see was we're setting up a committee and you're going to get banned from the forum if you swear or whatever. And it was just all rules and regulations, which is fine, but it's not really taking anybody forward. In my own discussion forum, by the way, at the Insider Club, I had gone about 2 or 3 years without ever banning anybody. I had no means of banning people. I never even built the feature. Everybody was fine, And when you assume that everybody's going to be cool, things get done, But it seemed to me that Codeigniter was going down a different road, a road of committees, bureaucracy, and pecking orders. And I just wasn't into it at all. So I basically just stayed away from that forum and continued to work happily. And that was the vibe. Now, at this point in time, I think that the situation has reached a point where it's ridiculous. I mean, in my opinion, anyone who is using Codeigniter now, it's like being on the Titanic 1 minute before it goes under and saying, everything's going to be fine, Well, it's not. And I'm going to outline a few of the reasons why. First of all, Codeigniter developers have got a terrible predicament that they have to deal with right now. Every single Codeigniter has to deal with the following. They're either going to have to continue with version 3, which, by the way, by my estimation, has not had a major rewrite since about 2011. It hasn't really changed, right? It's a very old framework. They're either going to have to stick with that, or they're going to have to move to version 4, which is, as we speak, kind of partially released. It appears to have been in this strange is it finished, is it not finished state for about 4 years. And Codeigniter developers are stuck right in the middle. Now, if you go with version 3, you're basically a laughing stock because you're using a framework, like I say, hasn't been updated since about 2011. Now, I'm not into framework rewrites, but I do like upgrades. There's a difference, right? But if you go with version 4, and I've had a look at version 4, I checked it out about a month ago, then if you do that, it's a Me Too framework. You're going to be looking at all of that composer and PSR poison. That stuff is utter poison. And Codeigniter has caved into that. It's very clear from looking at the code. It's all there. All of that PSR4 stuff. They've even changed the way that they start positioning curly brackets, and they've just gone for it hook, line and sinker. Now, if you're into that, bless you. Do what makes you feel good. If you think that represents progress, be my guest. But the challenge is, if you are going to go down that road, then why not just do it properly and do it with people who have been doing that for years? Why not go with Laravel or Symfony? You see, Codeigniter with version 4 has lost each and every unique selling point that it has. They are now aspiring, and if any Codeigniter person's watching this and saying, we're releasing version 4 next week, well, you're an idiot, because you're taking a framework that has unique things that it brings to the marketplace, incredible benchmarks, great documentation, great syntax, stability, a proven track record, a loyal community. You're taking all of that and you're turning it into a poor man's Laravel. Now, that's the decision that you have to make, Codeigniter developers. What are you going to do? I'm interested. Are you going to stick with version 3 and be laughed at for using this toxic brand? That's what I would say it is. Are you going to do that? Well, good luck, because I'll tell you, I'm not going to be defending it anymore. I'm not going to be out here saying, no, there is a case for Codeigniter. I'm gone. And I'm not claiming that I'm some kind of super important character of the community or anything like that. But I have defended Codeigniter well. Right now, I think Codeigniter is indefensible. So are you going to go with version 3, or are you going to go with the Me Too, the version 4 one, and take on board all of the bullshit that has, quite frankly, ruined PHP? I was reading a quote just the other day from the dude who invented PHP, and he says, my biggest moment of failure came when people started writing templating systems for my templating system. People, for some reason, think that there is merit in pretending that PHP is something that it's not. I mean, don't get me wrong, if you're a Python programmer or you're into one of the C languages, you need a template engine. They're good. But PHP, folks, doesn't need that stuff. It was built from the ground up to be seamlessly integrated with HTML, and it's a beautiful thing. But now we have large sections of the web development community who are saying, we're going to build a template engine. And I could give you a million other things, They're building all sorts of bullshit that's just making life really, really complicated. And they have the audacity to talk about things being elegant and simple. It's neither. It's over-engineered crap. And I can also tell you that I've spent some time going through the code for Codeigniter because I've been building another framework. And the way that I've been doing it is, I said, right, I'm going to keep the Codeigniter syntax, because through the years, various frameworks have emerged that have said, this is a fork of Codeigniter or an improvement. Things like Kohana and Fuel and others. But then when you look at the documentation, it's really complicated and the syntax is nothing like Codeigniter. So I've spent the last 2 months building an entirely new framework. It does not take one line of code from Codeigniter, but it uses the same syntax because I want Codeigniter people to feel kind of comfortable. Now, I know it sounds like I'm kind of promoting it and stuff. I'm not. The point I'm wanting to make is this. When I was building that framework, I would be looking at something like form validation, say, for example, and I'd be saying, right, what do we need this to do? Okay, check minimum length, check maximum length, valid email, required, and all of those things. And then I would have a look at the Codeigniter code, and it would be a mile long. And quite frankly, I couldn't even understand most of it. But then I would just say, okay, that's what they're doing. I'm going to just write it, the way that I would. And I'm no genius. But on average, I could do what Codeigniter was doing with about a quarter of the code. And by the way, there's a lot of stuff on Codeigniter that's not necessary. And to some people, the decisions that I'm talking about will be painful and controversial, but there's really a lot of stuff that you don't need, and I'll go into that. A good example is session handling. For example, a session helper, this session set value or whatever it does. PHP does a fantastic job of that already. And why would you want to try and fix something that that's not broken? I think that the ideal framework should work in harmony with PHP. So in the areas where PHP is good, such as session handling or integrating with HTML, right? PHP is good at that. Framework should be stepping back and saying, okay, PHP, do your thing. But when PHP is maybe could do with a little helping hand, for example, form validation or setting up routes or something like that, that's when a framework should come in. And very quickly, very easily, it should help you to get stuff done. Now, Codeigniter is full of stuff that nobody will ever use. Go look at the validation class. Look at the amount of things that you've never used, Validating the area of a triangle and all sorts. Well, that's not one of them, but you get the idea. And so when I eliminated all of that bullshit, and when I decided, right, I'm not going to write this rat's maze, I'm just going to write it as if it was myself. Like I say, I was able to achieve the same type of effect, but with a quarter the amount of lines of code. The initial benchmarks that I've carried out on a 4 gig of RAM computer, that's a rubbish computer with an i5 processor. Well, I've been getting page load speeds of usually between 3 and 4 thousandths of a second. That's with the entire framework loaded, all the helpers, the database and everything. Now, Codeigniter has good benchmarks, but I don't think they're that good, because when you really put that framework under the microscope, in my opinion, and I say this as a guy who was top of Google for 7 years, at least here in the UK, for the phrase website repairs. I fixed a lot of sites, right? Thousands, in fact. In my opinion, Codeigniter is a Frankenstein. It's very obvious to me that some of those classes were written by 3 or 4 different developers, and it's a mess. If you ever look at the files, they're just unnecessarily big. It's just a rat's maze. Not as bad as WordPress, but pretty bad. Now, I've covered the general limbo land scenario with regards to the rewrites, and I've covered how poor decisions have been made with regards to version 4 and not taking on modules and stuff. And I've spoken about the code being a bit of a rat's maze as well. But I think the final thing that I would like to say that really is worthy of mention is how those Codeigniter guardians have failed miserably in their promotion of the framework. Now, let's be clear. To be the author or the guardian or the owner of a framework has benefits. Let's be entirely honest about that. If I launch a framework and it does well, that has a number of benefits, ranging from you could potentially get invited to conferences and sponsors and discounts on hosting and who knows what. to even being able to land really great commercial contracts. So to be in that position is a privilege, and it has benefits, and let's just be honest about that. Now, if there was one thing that the Laravel community got right, in my opinion, it's that from day one, they turned that whole framework and its community into a kind of carnival. From day one, it was like, conferences and podcasts and all sorts of special events and fantastic tutorials and a really vibrant community. Now, you may like Laravel, you may not like Laravel, but one thing that they absolutely nailed was the promotional aspect of it. And by the way, over the years, I've observed and dabbled with frameworks that are absolutely fantastic, and nobody's heard of them because they were never promoted. It's just the way it goes. And so the most popular framework is not always the best one. I mean, you take Firebase, for example, from Google. Do you know that there's, or at least there was, an open source version of that doing exactly the same thing, and you could have it for free and everything, but nobody even knows about it because it was poorly promoted. Meanwhile, Google are making fortunes selling everybody Firebase for $20 a month. The point is, when you look at the Codeigniter site, in terms of community, in terms of upcoming events, promotions, and just things to look forward to, it is absolute tumbleweeds. I have been in cemeteries that have got a better atmosphere than that community. I'm not seeing any special events, no podcasts, no conferences, no free, silly, fuzzy hats, nothing, no competitions, nothing whatsoever. It's dead. And I say they, I'm talking about the people who had the nerve to take over that framework. I accuse them of driving that framework to the ground, to the point where guys like me are coming on and saying it's over, because they did nothing. All they did was created a henhouse and babbled on about their precious forum rules, their committees, and who's in charge of who. Meanwhile, the rest of the PHP community was moving on. It's a stagnant, dead community. Now, I do have a new framework that's coming out soon. Quite frankly, I don't know how it's going to do. I don't know if people are going to like it. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. I'll tell you one thing. If anybody out there is ever good enough, anyone is ever good enough to post a tutorial about this framework that I'm doing and they put it on YouTube, even if it's just a few minutes, I will be personally contacting each and every one of those people, and I'll be saying thank you. Because remember, it's a privilege to have a framework, to be the owner of a framework. And anybody who does that, anybody who takes their time on this earth and says, I'm going to do a tutorial, I'm telling you, I'm going to be reaching out, I'm going to be saying thank you so much. I promised myself I wouldn't mention this, but I'm actually thinking about doing more than just saying thank you. I'm thinking about sending out some fairly substantial payments as my way of saying I really appreciate that. And I'm not feeling sorry for myself here, but I have produced more Codeigniter tutorials over the last 5 years, I would say, possibly than the rest of the community put together. And do you know how many words of thanks or, little likes or whatever I've had from the owners of that framework? None. Not once. They never once reached out to say, hey, thanks for doing that, Thanks for covering the stuff that was not in the documentation. We appreciate that. Thanks for standing up for Codeigniter against all those other characters that were saying those things. Thanks a lot, Just wanted you to know that we really appreciate what you're doing. Folks, I have not had one solitary word from those people. They've never sent me anything, nothing at all, on any platform. They are totally isolated in their perfect, blissful ignorance. And I'll tell you something. If there is any shred of intelligence out there in this community of ours, then the day that this new framework of mine comes out, I'll tell you something. Codeigniter will be irrelevant immediately. Now, you can call that arrogant. You can say that I'm doing some cheap promotional. I don't care what you say. But Codeigniter is going to be irrelevant. The reason why it's going to, well, you'll see when the thing comes out, but on every significant and measurable benchmark, I am now wiping the floor with Codeigniter. And by the way, with my framework, there's no vibe where it doesn't work with such and such a version of PHP. There's no fancy messing about setup thing, nothing like that. You basically just get the folder and away you go, chuck it into your HT docs. And Codeigniter, I'm going to say this. I think I will say this. Codeigniter is going to be completely irrelevant soon. And when I say soon, I mean within the next couple of months. It's going to be irrelevant. And for anybody who disagrees, for any Codeigniter developer who's like, no, we're going to keep using it, well, get in touch with me, because I would be willing to pay money to listen to you saying, why are you using this framework? I cannot wait to hear the explanation, because I don't see any. The code is a rat's maze. Take it from me. I've spent 2 months looking at the code and redoing it. And we're not going to be so arrogant as to say doing it right, but I've managed to get pretty much the same type of gig with about a quarter of the code. The code's a complete mess. The framework itself, it's in limbo land. There's no upcoming events, no conferences, there's no jobs. There's nothing but ridicule online. Quite frankly, the only person who has been standing up for the framework in any kind of semi-vocal way has been this guy. Well, guess what? I'm off. Tatty bye and good luck. And I am not going to be the poster boy for Codeigniter. Probably I never was, but I'm not gonna. And I think that if the owners of that framework ever watch this, those people who took that framework over, and shame on you, because there are lots of hard-working developers who depend on that framework. I've met many of them, and they are good people, and they have families, and some of them, actually, one that I know has got quite a lot of health challenges, and they cannot afford the luxury of wandering around the web having everybody ridiculing them because their framework has not been updated since 2011. So shame on you and your decision to turn Codeigniter into a Me Too with version 4. That was actually the last nail in the coffin. I'm glad that you haven't released it yet, but when it does come out, that will absolutely be the end. All you've done is you've created a recruitment platform for Laravel. So, Codeigniter is finished. I have gratitude for those who wrote that code and allowed me to access that incredible framework for all of these years. But to those people who took over the framework, to them, I have no desire to say anything hostile. If they came to the door, I would give them a bowl of soup and I would be friendly. But I have no respect for them as developers or as framework owners. It is time to close the book on Codeigniter.